We are back, and we are joined now by Adrienne Maree Brown, activist, scholar, and New York Times bestselling author whose latest book is entitled Loving Corrections. Adrienne, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Emma.
So, we've talked a lot on this show about how people are really lacking in community these days. I mean, whether it be public space shrinking due to rampant privatization, whether it be like many parts of the country just being atomized geographically, or suburbia being this place where people have little fiefdoms and there's very little community involvement. It increases a lot of, I feel like it exacerbates bigotry, it creates conspiracism and things like that. And it seems like that is such a central focus of your book, community through activism, through hearing one another. How conscious were you of maybe that kind of alienation that a lot of people seem to be experiencing in recent years?
I felt very conscious of it. I've been doing work in terms of trying to create more justice and more liberation in the world for almost 25 years. And one of the things I have witnessed over and over again is how people respond when they're given a chance to connect with each other and support each other, and how people respond when they're given instruction or pushed to divide from each other. And I see that divisiveness growing and growing. And I can really see how rapidly it's grown even in the last 5 years. And I saw it happening in every community, every space that I was in. And I'm an interracial kid. You know, I'm someone who operates with a lot of different communities that I feel like I'm a part of. And so for me, when I was seeing it, I was like, oh, this is a breaking down of places that I know can get along. Like, I know they can hear each other. I know they can understand each other. So I felt really mindful of how could I create a tool that people could use to have better conversations with each other.
I love that because when we hear about divisiveness in specifically in the context of politics, it's
Mm-hmm.
usually about like, will you just stop calling us out for being racist? Stop being
Mm-hmm.
so divisive.
Yeah.
And your book has so many it's like a guide for so many different kinds of people to build solidarity.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you draw a distinction between shunning opinions and people and far right movements in the way that they
Mm-hmm.
should be shunned, and balancing that with creating solidarity with people who may not be there yet or may need some hand holding to get to a certain place?
Yeah. I mean, I think that we're in a really interesting moment right now where, like, there are these big concepts, you know, MAGA, the far right, there's these huge concepts. And I think it can make us forget that we're actually in relationship, many of us, with people who are a part of whatever those huge concepts are. And as long as you're in a relationship, something else is possible still. So part of what I wanted to do was write a book that I was like, you can hand this to your racist uncle and then sit down and have a conversation about what comes up when you're talking about it. Um, I've also been talking a lot. I was book touring this around the South, and a question came up around shame. Like, what about shame? Don't we need to like make people ashamed of some of these perspectives that they have? And the way I responded to it, which has been really sitting with me, is that we use shame to shrink things. And so we do want to shrink these concepts. You know, I want to shrink the concept of white supremacy or any supremacy. I want to shrink the concept of the earth being a disposable place. I want to shrink the concept that we can harm each other without any accountability. I want to not shrink the people. I want to shrink those ideas. I want to reclaim the people. I've almost been talking about it as people get caught in these prisons of ideas where they don't even understand that they're inside a limited space, and that they're sometimes have born into it, growing up in it, growing up completely surrounded by people who are telling them hate is the only way you can belong. Looking down on others is the only way you can belong. Um, Limiting other people's rights and freedoms is the only way you can belong or have power. Part of what we have to do is break each other out of those kind of ideas. And unfortunately, I always say, I'm like, if this worked, maybe we would try it. Like, if shame worked, maybe I would try it. But I'm like, I have not met people who get very ashamed about being white supremacists and that that's the way it works. So then we have to try a different tactic. And I'm always like, how do we use our energy in the best possible way? For me, relationship is one of the best possible ways I know to actually make change. So it's reaching back out and saying, can we have a disagreement and stay connected? And can I still see your humanity when we're having this conversation? And if not, can I set a good boundary that still honors your humanity?
It's is shame a very American concept? Like, is the way? I mean,
I think
there's
that shame has been around forever,
yeah.
but I do think that there's a way that we deploy it that is, I think there's a way we do almost everything that is unique, which is, I think we have an idea of being better. Like we have an idea of ourselves as like the best nation in the world. And we have an idea of everything we're doing as being better than what anyone else is doing. And I think from that place, shame hits different, right? Because you're just like, oh, we're really trying to demoralize people. We're really trying to bring them down so that they will behave and they'll be part of the American experiment without trying to challenge it too much or change it too much, right?
It just
And we make
occurs to
fun of
me,
each other instead of
yeah.
building each other up and building up the kind of values and the values and the communities that we actually want.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, it's fine. It was
it just
something was coming up for you, right?
yeah, it just occurs to me that there's this very Protestant element of shame, or to a degree, but I think you're right in the sense of it shame is also atomizing in and of itself as opposed to communal, and I think that that's maybe why it doesn't have the efficacy that you describe.
Well, and I think that this is the same thing where people talk about cancel culture. I've written about this, but this idea of like, isn't that person ashamed of what they've done? And I think if we move that way, then often what happens is people isolate, they shift into a different community, and they continue doing harmful things, or they keep doing the thing that was so shameful in the first place. And we shrink as movements who are trying to change. We shrink and shrink and shrink because we just keep losing people to this sort of shameful, they're moving away from us. I'm interested in a different move. And I'm not saying you have to go for the furthest away from you, space politically. I'm not saying you have to call the most racist person, or the most, whatever, deplorable, the person who's like most anti your existence, right? Because I do have people in my family who are homophobic, transphobic, all those things. I have all those things in my family. I'm not necessarily reaching all the way to them, but I might reach to my mom who is still in a relationship with people and have a conversation with her that is like, how can I be really loving in my conversation with you? And then that you be really loving when you're in direct conversation with folks who are maybe too challenging for me to be in contact with right now. Like that's a real thing. And then I do feel like I do want a future where people feel ashamed to be racist. I do want a future where people feel ashamed to be homophobic. But I think, again, it has to happen at a collective and mass level rather than trying to individually target people because they can just shift out of accountability and go other places. I think that there's something so important about being able to sit down with someone and say, I think there's better. I think that you could be better. I think that our relationship could be better. And I think it would mean us seeing each other's humanity. And when you speak like this, when you talk like this, when you vote like this, I feel like you don't see my humanity and you don't care about my life. And I'm not giving up on you, And
Right.
I think that's a really different approach than just being like, oh, you said that? Don't like, that's it. Now I'm leaving you to them because the them is growing. that body of people, I feel like 10 years ago, there's a lot of things that happen now in our political realm that would be unimaginable even 10 years ago, because we've just been conceding the territory. We've been like, oh yeah, you're just ridiculous. Go over there with the ridiculous people. And all of a sudden you have a huge, huge, massive voting block of people who are not connected to reality, not connected to science, not connected to community who holds them accountable. We can't afford that at this stage for the whole planet, for the whole species. We can't afford that.
And your first essay is directed towards men, right?
It is.
You speak about how it's the first words are "dear men," and you wanted to address seemingly patriarchy right off the bat. So
Yeah.
much of what you're describing reminds me of other things we've discussed on the show about how incel online culture is growing, and for young men in particular. I know
Yeah.
someone in my life who, when they were in a very lonely period of their life, was into Jordan Peterson. Then when in a relationship, more community is just a progressive leftist, right? I mean, those things
Yeah.
that happens. But what's the incel stuff? They create these extremely rigid gender binaries. They
Mhm.
talk about the value of women or as sexual objects in this extremely almost scientific way where they try to naturalize it. They give these young men these ideas. They go out into the real world.
Yeah.
Many women are turned off by the obvious rigidity of these gender roles. Then they get
Yeah.
rejected and they go back for more. And that
Yeah.
cycle to me is something I thought about when I saw what you were writing about, uh, you know, telling men practice sitting in groups with other men was one of the planks, but also be vigilant about your masculinity not becoming toxic, and
Yeah.
that becomes so much harder when there's that isolation, and then they go to these influencers on the internet.
Yeah, I think we have so many people now who have a podcast or have a platform, have a space to spew all kinds of stuff. And I think we're also in this really interesting moment in history that, sometimes like when you're in something, you don't recognize what's happening. So I think when we were part of women's empowerment movement and women fighting for equality in the workplace and feminism movement, there's been all this movement, forward movement of women, forward movement of non-binary and trans people, forward movement. And instead of men feeling like, oh, wonderful, like that's great, like, all of humanity is coming into right relationship, there's this sense of I'm losing my power, I'm losing my place, I don't know where I belong, I don't know how to be what I was trained to be. I was trained to be an alpha protector male. I have an automatic importance in society. And now that's shifting, where it's like you're not more important than anyone else in this society. And that can be a gift if you embrace it. But if you are being told you need to fight and you need to push these people back down, that's what all the abortion stuff is about. That's what all the reproductive justice, struggles are about, is trying to push all the other genders back into their place so that men can maintain this dominance that they've been told they get to have. And what I was witnessing was seeing it really intimately, seeing it in relationships of women that I loved who were having children with men who then would slip into these regressive behaviors under pressure when they hit their midlife crisis mode, and just feeling so sad because I was like, I know that's not your soul. I know that's not, the spark of the miracle of life that is in you was not put on earth in order to terrify the women around you and to make us feel unsafe and to make us feel disempowered. So that letter for me was a love note to these men who I had at different points in my life looked at as brothers, looked at as beloveds, looked at as friends, and now was facing and seeing this violence, this pain coming through them. And I've actually had, since the essay first came out, that was one that was published on my blog before it was in the book. And I've had lots of people reach out to me because they've started groups of men who are sitting with each other and being like, how do we really reckon with having been raised inside of a system that we now want to eradicate from ourselves, that we want to heal from, and we want to find ways to access our whole humanity, which means being able to access the part of us that hurts and that is vulnerable and that wants to be a part of community and that wants to learn to be in love and be a good dad and be a good family member. I think most humans want the same things, but the stories that we're told really impact what we can have access to in a lifetime. So part of what I'm trying to do here is tell some different stories.
Yeah, there's a dearth of positive masculinity in representation, and
Yeah.
I think right now about the Trump campaign and what JD Vance represents in that area, and it's
Honey.
it's exactly
Yes.
what you're talking. I mean,
Yeah.
it's exactly what you're talking about, and the part about men and their, you implore and say for men to be vigilant about their masculinity becoming toxic when they
Yeah.
are in between their 30s and 50s. You
Yeah.
hinted at it there, but can you explain what you feel that phenomenon is tied to?
Yeah. And I think, I'm really curious to see if this stays true over the next 50 years or so. But in this moment, we're in this transition phase, right? Where a lot of men were still born into a world where they were being trained to be these alpha male characters. And then there's been this huge shift in economics and power dynamics for men. And so now you have these men who are like, okay, like I'm down with that and like kind of down with the idea of feminism, but wait, I didn't expect to feel so disempowered and unseated in my life. And so I'm 30 or 40 and I'm not the boss like that I thought I would be. Maybe I'm having to report to a woman. Maybe my wife is the person who's making more money than I am. How does my family look at me? Do they see me as a success if I'm a stay-at-home dad or if I'm sharing that load? I think that there's a real sense of identity loss of like, I don't quite know how to be this new kind of man or this other kind of man. And for me, a lot of the invitation is like, you don't have to be a different man. You just have to be a human, right? What we're inviting you towards is that there's a center place where it's like, this is what humanity actually is for all of us. That's what we want to invite you back into. You've been in a place where you think man puts you over here and women puts you down here, right? We're just saying, come back into humanity. We're all actually completely capable of doing all the things. And most of the things we actually need to do together. You know, that's the other piece of this for me is I think men are reaching this age where a lot of what they've been told is that they're going to reach individual success, but we're actually in a massive shift where we need to do everything we're doing together in community. Like we're in a really precarious place. Our climate is a precarious place. We're on the brink of a lot of world war troubles. We're already involved in just so much struggle, so much pain, so much harm. We're in danger. Like as a species, we're in danger. Men need to come and be a part of getting through this period, right? And we share the earth with them. I say this all the time because I'll look at someone like JD Vance or Trump or whatever, and I'm like, I don't want to give that any of my life force, any of my attention. But then I'm like, I do share this earth with that person. I have to figure out how to contend with they're trying to contend for power. I have to be able to contend for power as well. And I have to be able to deal with the fact that they exist and something in them is so wounded and needs so much healing. And I might not be able to heal that person in my lifetime, but I can create more space for masculinity that is part of humanity.
Very well said, and I love that essay in your book. Again, people should read this and give it to men in your life that you think may be open to it, or maybe if they aren't. And there were another chapter part that resonated with me was the fighting racism, where you direct advice to white people in particular. Learning to own the impact of white supremacy, doing anti-racist work without it being self-serving. These are some of the advice that you give. But I was really the specific section that you carve out for Jewish Americans. It was really fascinating, embracing anti-Zionism in the same way that more progressive white people have embraced anti-racism. This is so necessary in this moment for obvious reasons amidst the genocide in Gaza. Can you talk about that section and then in particular your choice to include that kind of extra piece?
Yeah, it was an addendum, it was something I wanted to bring in. And I think it came from, a real sense of like, these really harmful ideas can get bonded with our identity such that we think that that's who we are. And so, that's part of why we talk about racism and we talk about white supremacy, particularly, that there's this idea of supremacy that got bonded in with what it meant to be a white person. When the whole idea of whiteness was being formed, it was being woven in, right? That supremacy is a part of it. And so now when people are like, oh, I'm an anti-racist, like I'm a white person, but I'm actively working against that connection that happened. I think the same thing happened for Jewish people with Zionism. There's been Judaism forever. There's been Jewish people since the beginning. And they've been practicing in so many different ways, so many communal ways, so many beautiful ways. I have a lot of incredible Jewish friends in my life who have gifted me the practice of ritual with them, of Shabbat with them. I've gotten to go through some of these things. I'm like, oh, what it means to be Jewish is actually to be loving, to be caring, to be looking out for your neighbors, to be thinking about repair from harm. Zionism comes in and is like, this is about taking land and claiming something and trying to create an ethno-state. That's a totally different project from what Judaism has been about for its entire existence. But it comes in at this interesting moment where there's a ton of trauma and you can take advantage of that and you can fuse these things together. So I wanted to talk about that because I learned that from anti-Zionist Jewish people, that they were like, the way that I began to understand that Zionism wasn't a fundamental aspect of being Jewish. It was actually a really harmful thing that was happening. And we were raised to think it was a beautiful vision and that it was our destiny. But actually, it's causing so much harm. It's causing so much dissonance in our community. And now we see this genocide playing out where I think if any other country was doing what Israel is doing right now, we would be very clear-headed. And it's even interesting, to watch the debate and to be like, oh, look at this, the differences in the stance on Ukraine and the stance on Palestine, where the power dynamics are so similar. And we're showing up in one situation for the person who's being attacked and in one situation for the person who is doing the attacking. And yes, there's so much. I mean, we can unpack and unpack and unthread. But for me as a Black person who has really lived in this country and watched and become in deep community with white people undoing racism, it felt so important to me to see that there was an option like this for Jewish people. That was like, oh, we can undo this work as well. And in this moment, I think one of the most beautiful things I've seen amidst all the horror is how many Jewish people are like, oh, I can let go of Zionism and I can heal, I can recover my soul, and I can recover community. And in doing that, that's the way that we will actually stop this problem, not just in this moment, but in an ongoing way. Because I think that's also the piece is now people are not just saying we want a ceasefire. It's like we want an arms embargo and we want to stop this occupation. We want to end this. And I will also say this, I live on land that was stolen. I live in the United States. And so it's very personal for me. I'm like, I wasn't there at the moment in history when I could have intervened on this happening and could have changed the story of this happening. But I'm here now and my country is supporting the same thing happening somewhere else and I can intervene. I can play a role in that. So it felt really important for me to include that.
Yeah, and I think the optimism about that moment, that display of solidarity for a free Palestine in this current moment is, I think, part of the vision that you're hoping for, which is a glimmer of
Yeah.
hope in this. And
Yeah.
can you expand a little more on the notions of power and whiteness and how
Yeah.
you including that section, it's also an acknowledgement that whiteness and power through whiteness is done through imperialism too, and that Zionism has folded into that, obviously, but that
Yeah.
history is so present, I think, in white supremacy all around us.
Yeah, I think that's important. I mean, I want to acknowledge, and as I was writing it, I was like, I understand that Jewish people are a multiracial people. And then I also understand, and what I see, the visual of what's happening between Israel and Palestine is very much that Israel has, in part of its development, really drawn in white Jewishness and really created a space of whiteness for Jewish people. And if you study American history, you see how whiteness developed and how it has claimed one people at a time, right? It's like, okay, we're starting off with these British people, these French people. Okay, now, all right, Italians, okay, Irish people, like y'all can be down. Now, Jewish people come in a different way where they're like, we were oppressed by white people. We were oppressed by people who wanted to be Aryan. So the journey from going from that to being in a space where you're like, mostly in the US, when we were moving through the world, we're identified as white people. We're seen as white people. And it gives us a different kind of access and a different kind of power than brown people have. And when I speak with anti-Zionist Jewish people, they're like, I can see that, I can understand that, I can acknowledge that, and then I can take responsibility for it. I think that's part of what we're seeing play out internationally now, is that we're looking at the Middle East and we're partnering with people who have the whitest looking leadership, people who would come to this country and be acknowledged as white people. And we're being like, that's where we're going to pour our energy and attention. That's who we're going to call our ally. That's who we're going to call our friend, the people who will serve Western interest in this part of the world. It's deep. And the other piece of this, I think that we have to bring in is we're in a, it was 9/11 yesterday. It was like, we're in a long arc in the US with our Islamophobia, with our anti-Arab sentiment, with our racism against people from that part of the world. So these things are all tied in, right? And one of the things I keep trying to do is like pull them apart just enough so we can look at them clearly and be like, oh, we were told to see these people as untrustworthy, as terrorist, as violent. We were told that. As a Black person, I'm like, I've been on the other end of that same kind of storytelling where all of my people are something and all of us deserve some kind of punishment, and all the white people are innocent and all of them are victims and all of them deserve protection. And once you start to see it, you can't unsee it, right? This
They
book,
deploy
the
the same
ideas,
tropes,
it's
sexual
exactly the same
violence.
tropes.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's sexual violence, but it's also like the story only gets told one way, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think it was so interesting in the debate when Kamala was like, well, look at where all this started, October 7th. And it was like, oh, that's such that's a very Western way to tell that story, right?
Yep.
To say, oh, and again, because it's the same thing that happened with 9/11, where it's like, oh, this just happened to us out of the blue, out of nowhere. We have no idea why it happened. Instead of saying, what are the conditions that are being created around the world that would make people want to do this, right? Can we get curious about it? And without having to justify it, right? I think that there's a distinction that's important, that's being able to say, I'm not in charge of whatever strategies people are using for their resistance, but can I understand why people might engage in resistance, or why people might engage in pushing back against empire, or why people might engage in pushing back against those who are oppressing them? And one of the things I think we are privileged in is that we get to sit in a place where I'm like, well, I'm not under bombs and constant attack and being enclosed in a small space. I have room to have a ton of nuance about everything that's happening.
Yep.
But when I have been in situations of deep oppression, that nuance fell away. All I was concerned with was, how do I get this person to stop hurting me? And whatever story I need to change to get them to stop hurting me, I'm going to try to do that. I think we're in that situation right now where there's a ton of people who are like, how do I get this person to stop hurting me? And to be a US citizen is to recognize, like, we are the funder of most of the harm that's happening in the world. We are thinking it through. We are collaborating with those who are causing harm. And we need to take responsibility for that if we hope to continue to exist.
Yeah. Exactly. And
Yeah.
we're limited on time. I could go on about that for quite a while, but
Yeah.
there's so much in your, you spoke about the earth a little bit. You have a chapter about being accountable to the earth,
Yes.
that I'd love for you to touch on. But personally, you had your section on your conversation with your sisters was something
Yes.
that I really loved. Like, I have
Yeah.
a sister, and I really resonated with
Good.
how you talked about how you guys would argue and lacking models of conflict resolution when growing up.
Yep.
Like, my parents are lawyers, so we were taught to argue a lot.
Yeah. Let's litigate this. Let's
That's
litigate
why I'm in
this.
this job, maybe a little bit.
Yeah.
But not the
Yeah.
conflict resolution part, and we've gotten
Right.
better. But like, some of your suggestions about these kind of familial dynamics are really key here too, because we always get IMs from viewers about my brother's in the QAnon rabbit hole. My dad is
Yes.
a Trump supporting the whatever, and how do I
Mhm.
approach them about this? I think the conversation that you transcribe between you and your sisters is about repair in those relationships. If you could
That's
talk a bit
right.
about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I do appreciate, it's all connected to me, right? That I'm like, even when I look at Israel, Palestine, I'm like, y'all are all brothers and sisters. We're all brothers and sisters. Like, in all these places where conflict is happening, we're actually all family. We're all related. We're all coming from the same root systems. All of us are, but none of us learn conflict resolution. Almost none of us learn it at a young age. And that plays out at the small scale, at the local scale, at the federal scale, and at the international scale. Like, I think it's the same thing happening at every level. So for me, I'm like, okay, let's bring it back down to the most accessible place for many of us, which is every year I'm going to see my family at least once. How do I shape those conversations? And this idea of repair, of being proactive about it, is recognizing most of the time the conflicts that are happening, it looks like it's about something that's happening between us, but so often it's actually about stuff that's happening within our own lives and things that are not being seen, right? That cousin who's like slipping off into a cult, something was not being seen usually in that person. There was a way that person was not being heard. They were moving into a crisis of isolation, of individualism, of not feeling honored, of not feeling smart enough, of not being recognized in dating, or whatever it is. Something's happening where that person's being lost in the social fabric. They're slipping through. And as siblings, as loved ones, as family, we're in a unique position to be like, hey, I see you. I see that something's going on. Can we talk about it? Can you tell me what's happening? When we started doing these check-ins, like, we have political differences. They're not that kind of, it's not like that kind
A
of,
gulf, right?
yeah, it's not like a huge chasm. I'm like, hey, girl, but we were coming together and being like, we're exploding over how the dishwasher got loaded or something. And then having to cry it all out and be like, well, what was really happening is I'm super stressed at my job, or my money's not right, or I just went through a breakup, or something's happening with my health, or I'm in a grieving process. And I need you to know that so that you can be tender with me. That's the thing that almost everyone wants, is people to look at them and be like, I can be tender with you. I can still see the child in you. I can see the person that I love in you. And I can give you room for your humanity and your contradictions and your need for repair, whatever that might be. I can learn to give you a good apology. And then I can learn, the best apology is the one where it includes how you're not going to do something again and you don't do it.
Right.
So it's like really learning to make those adaptations as well. I think that if more people were able to practice this at the intimate level, and I also want to say, like, if your family doesn't feel like the safe space to practice this, chosen family or your friendship circles, there's tons of places where you can actually practice this. The idea is to just be very intentional. Like, we're going to be together. How are we? Let's start off with, how are we actually coming into this? And then let's be.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very, very well said and beautiful message. Honestly, I really hope people take the lessons from this. And there's so many more essays in here that we didn't have time to get to, but that's why you should be buying the book. That's the point of this. So the book is called Loving Corrections. We'll put a link to that in the description wherever people are listening to or watching this. Adrienne, thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me and the work y'all do. Appreciate it.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.